Hi everyone, so this video is about specialised cells. So a specialised cell is a cell that is differentiated for a set function or purpose. So it's started to adapt for that particular function. So for example, a muscle cell containing a lot of mitochondria is adapted. Now that differentiation changes the subcellular structure. Okay, so what that means is it changes either the amount or the type of organelles that are present inside that cell, depending on what the function of that cell is. Now, specialisation and differentiation occurs really early on in development in animals, whereas in plants, a lot of the cells have the ability to still become another type of cell, even later on in their lifetime. Okay, so we've looked at the first 2 points in quite a lot of detail in the other videos, but the third one, knowing that certain types of cells are adapted for a function helps us then understand the greater picture of how that particular system works. So for example, understanding how cardiac muscles, for example, are differentiated might give us an understanding of how the heart works and the circulatory system. Okay, so it's really important that we understand how each individual cell is adapted so that we can then figure out how it works in the bigger cell in the bigger system. Okay, so there's 3 things that we're going to look at. So being able to describe how cells differentiate to form those specialised cells, which I touched upon really at the start, to describe how a specialised cell is adapted or different specialised cells are adapted, and then we're going to explain how the structure of the specialised cells relates to their function. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to do this little recap activity. Now, if you've watched the other 2 videos, you'll have seen this before. Okay, now the idea is that as time goes on, we get quicker and we get better and more accurate at doing this. So if you can have a go now, so pause the video and pair up the structures with their roles. Okay, if there's any that you're not quite sure of, just put a little star until we go through it. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this in any extensive detail. If there's massive issues, then go back and watch the cell structure video. Okay, so I'll just pop that back on for you in case you need a minute. Okay, so what I've done then is I've broken down this idea of specialised cells into animal cells that are specialised and plant cells that are specialised. Now, it's really important to point out before we start that this sperm cell is an animal cell, okay? And just because it doesn't look like our standard diagram of an animal cell doesn't mean it's not an animal cell, okay? It's this animal cell that's adapted, it's specialised for its function. Okay, so we've got here our sperm cell, okay? So the function overall of a sperm cell is to fertilise an egg cell, okay? Now, sperm and eggs are amazing because they work alone. They don't work as part of a tissue, okay? So they work as part of an individual cell. So we can see here that they've got this really long tail. Now, the proper name, there's a more scientifically correct name, is a flagellum. So they've got this flagellum that propels them towards the egg, okay? Now, this part here, this middle section, is absolutely filled with mitochondria. Now, you might remember that we've said before that mitochondria play a really important role in respiration. So having that mitochondria there means that ultimately we get more respiration happening and therefore a larger release of energy, okay? And that can help the tail to move and propel that sperm towards the egg, okay? And then we've got the head, which is called an acrosome. Now, that acrosome is filled with enzymes. Now, if you're not quite sure what an enzyme is, then have a little look at that video, but they contain these digestive enzymes which help to break through the egg, so break through that membrane. Okay, and they've got a very large nucleus which contains genetic information. Okay, and that's the genetic information that will then combine with the 23 chromosomes that are in the egg to then result in fertilisation. Okay, muscle cells then. So you can see here there's 3 different types of muscle cell in this example that I've done here. So we've got the heart muscle cell, smooth muscle cell, and skeletal muscle. You can see that they're all slightly different, okay? But overall, the overall function of a muscle cell is to contract and relax and allow movement. And that's even the case in heart muscle, for example. Now, they contain these special fibres that allow the fibres to slide over the top of each other. okay? And because they slide over the top of each other, those fibres can then contract. Again, you'll notice, just like in the sperm cell, there's lots and lots of mitochondria. Now, those mitochondria serve exactly the same purpose, lots of respiration, and therefore large release of energy. Okay, and then there's also a store of glycogen. Now, glycogen is the storage molecule of glucose. So when we've got excess glucose in our body, it's stored as glycogen. When we need to respire, or when we need to respire more, for example, when we're exercising, that glycogen is converted into glucose and then utilized through respiration. Okay, and that results in the release of energy. Okay, nerve cell. So again, another cell that looks nothing like that standard animal cell that we look at, but it is an animal cell. So you can see that here in this diagram that we've got A, which are dendrites. Okay, and the dendrites allow connections to be made to other cells. Now, the real name for a nerve cell is a neuron. Okay, we've got a large axon, so the axon's here. And that's the part that carries the electrical impulse from one place to another. We've then got a synapse. So the synapse is the gap between two of these neurons. Okay, and that allows the electrical impulse to be passed from nerve to nerve. Okay, and that synapse contains lots and lots of mitochondria. Okay, because that energy is needed to form those neurotransmitters. Okay, if you're not quite sure about neurotransmitters, don't worry. Okay, you come on to that when we look at nerves in a lot more detail. These are just your basic examples of different specialised cells. Okay, so moving on to plant cells then. So we've got here a root hair cell. So no clues for guessing that they're found in the roots. Okay, so their main function is to absorb water and absorb minerals. So we can see, again, it looks nothing like that particular diagram that we all focus on as being a plant cell, but it is a plant cell. So if we look here, they've got these large projections and these large hairs, like projections, if you like, that mean that there's a large surface area. Okay, so water to move into the cell via osmosis. Okay, they've got a huge, you can see it here, huge permanent vacuole. Okay, so having that permanent vacuole means that more water can be absorbed and it speeds up osmosis. There's lots of mitochondria that carry out respiration needed for active transport, and often that's the active transport of minerals. Okay, so now we've got xylem. So xylem is what's responsible for transporting water from the roots right up to the highest leaves. Okay, so when xylem is first formed, the xylem cells are alive. However, this buildup of lignin means that the xylem will then die, and then that forms this hollow tube. Okay, so although you might think, well, if it's dead, how does it work properly? Well, that lignin means that the xylem is super strong, okay? And because it's so strong, the pressure that the water is under moving up the plant is then withstanded. So that's why we don't end up with plants not functioning properly. It's because they've got that strengthening molecule in there, in the lignin. Okay, so phloem, we've got phloem here. So this is the diagram. So the role of phloem is to transport glucose around the plant. So that can be from the roots up to the leaves, or the leaves down to the roots. Obviously, when photosynthesis is happening, that glucose is being formed in the leaves. And it's still important because we've just said, if I flip back, that the root hair cells require lots and lots of mitochondria for respiration, so therefore they require lots of glucose. So that glucose needs to be transported from the leaves right down to those root hair cells. Okay, so the cell walls break down to form, we can see these sieve plates here, and that's what allows the water carrying that dissolved glucose to move up and down. Okay, and they're supported by companion cells. Now, the companion cells don't have lots of, the companion cells have lots of mitochondria. That mitochondria is there to provide the energy needs for the phloem, okay, because the phloem doesn't have any cell structures like mitochondria because it needs all the space to be able to transport the glucose. Okay, so palisade cell. So the palisade cell is in the mesophyll layer of the leaf. So we've got the waxy cuticle, you've got the upper epidermis, and then you've got the mesophyll layer. And these are at the top of the mesophyll. And the idea of a palisade cell is that it absorbs all the sunlight that's required for photosynthesis. Okay, well, a vast amount anyway. So you can imagine that they probably contain lots and lots of chloroplasts so that the chlorophyll can then trap the light. And again, like I just said, they're located either on the outer layers or towards the top of the leaf to absorb as much sunlight as possible. Okay, so there are 3 learning outcomes, which I hope we've covered so far. So looking at how cells are differentiated, being able to describe different specialised cells and how that relates to their function. Okay, so I've got a recall task for you to have a little go at now. So try not to look at any notes that you've made and try and have a go at just working through that. Okay, so just pause the video. Okay, so if we have a little look, so the nerve cells carry electrical impulses around the body. There's lots of dendrites to make the connections to other cells. It has a very long axon that carries the impulse from one place to another. The synapses to pass the electrical impulses between the nerve cells. Synapses contain lots of mitochondria to provide the energy. Okay, then we've got our muscle cells. They contain special fibres that can slide over one another to allow the fibres to contract. There's lots of mitochondria, store of glycogen. Okay, and last but not least, the sperm cell, the role of that, or the function, is to fertilise the egg. The middle section is full of mitochondria to provide energy for the tail to move. The digestive enzymes are in the acrosome, or the head, okay, to break through the egg. Lovely. Okay, so 4 questions now. These are those AO1 questions again. So basic, can you remember that knowledge? Okay, so I'll just give you, let's say, 5 minutes, pause the video, have a little go. Okay, so what is the function of root hair cells, xylem cells and phloem cells? Now, if we group them together, they're all involved in transport in plants. Okay, so root hair cells absorb the water from the soil, which the xylem then transports from the roots to the highest leaf. Okay, that's how those two can link together. And the phloem transports glucose all around the plant. So what the buildup of what chemical causes xylem to die? That's the buildup of lignin. That causes the xylem to die. Why do root hair cells have lots of mitochondria? So they have lots of mitochondria as they carry out respiration, which releases energy that's then used in active transport. And what cell do photosynthetic cells contain a lot of? So obviously, if they're photosynthetic, lots of photosynthesis, so therefore lots of chlorophyll. Okay, chloroplasts, which contain the chlorophyll to then trap the light. Okay, so another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions now. Now, all of these are AO1 questions, apart from towards the end, which is asking you to think about in a bit more detail why it is that those muscle cells contain that particular store that you've noted. Okay, so let's say 5 minutes again, pause the video. Okay, so why must xylem cells be strong? So xylem cells must be strong to withstand the pressure of the water. Okay, why do they have a tail or a flagella? Is to help the sperm move towards the egg. What is a specialised cell? It's a cell which is differentiated and is adapted for its function. What do muscle cells contain a store of? They contain a store of glycogen. Then this is where it gets a bit more tricky. So thinking about why is it important that they have that store? Now, like I said, glycogen is readily broken down into glucose, okay, or it's converted to glucose, and that can then be used in respiration. Okay, so what other adaptation of a muscle cell links to the store of glycogen? Okay, so thinking about what else is needed for that respiration to take place. Well, if there's a large amount of glycogen, there must be a large amount of mitochondria. Okay, some exam style questions now. So this first question is a 3-mark question. Okay, so we've got an image of a plant root here. So it's not said anything about root hair cells, but we should be thinking in our brains now that if it's saying plant root, we're talking about root hair cells. Okay, so the plant root is adapted for absorbing water from the soil, using information from the diagram to explain how this plant root is adapted for absorbing water. Now, if it's saying use information from the diagram, it's only asking you to refer to what is in front of you. Okay, so for example, you wouldn't be talking about a large vacuole because here you can't see a large vacuole. So what can you see in that diagram that is going to be helpful for absorbing water? Okay, so 3 marks, let's say 3 minutes. So if you pause your video. Okay, so the plant root has many hair cells. Okay, we can see that there's many hairs here that are all 1 cell thick. Okay, so a really short diffusion distance. Okay, so this increases the surface area. So we can see it's increased that surface area for that root, but also it provides a short diffusion pathway and therefore more osmosis of water into the root. If you've written diffusion of water, that's absolutely fine, but the more scientifically accurate word there to use is osmosis. Okay, so we've got a basic labelling task here. So just because it's asking for a root hair cell and asking you to label doesn't mean that everything that you've learned about the basic structure of a plant cell needs to fall out of your ears. Okay, we can still use what we've learned there to this situation. So use these words to label. So we've got the cell wall, we've got the cell membrane, cytoplasm and vacuole. Okay, if you're not sure about that, okay, if you weren't quite clear, there's 4 lines and 5 words. Now, what I tend to do is that when I was doing my exams is that I go through and just cross out ones that I knew weren't relevant. Okay, so I know that that's the nucleus and there's no arrow, so I'm just going to put a cross through that. Okay, I might also be thinking, I can't remember whether it's the wall or the membrane, okay, but just don't leave these style of questions blank. The way that I remember is that a wall goes on the outside. Okay, so if the wall's on the outside, then everything else is on the inside of that wall. Okay, so that's why the wall, cell wall is that one, just on the outside there. Okay, this one's a little bit more difficult because what it's actually asking you is not, can you remember anything about specialised cells? It's asking you, can you remember anything about active transport, diffusion and osmosis? Okay, that kind of topic. So the cell is respiring aerobically. Okay, so we also need to know that what aerobic respiration is. Okay, so which arrow, A, B, C or D, represents the movement of oxygen molecules, the movement of carbon dioxide molecules. Name the process by which these gases move into and out of the cell. Okay, so I'll just give you 3 minutes for that one. Okay, so movement of oxygen molecules. So we know that in aerobic respiration, oxygen's produced. Okay, so therefore, oxygen's required. So therefore, oxygen needs to be diffusing into the cell. Okay, so if we have a look, we can already then eliminate 2 of those pictures, and that's going to be B and D because that's showing the movement out of the cell. Okay, now if we look, we've got a high concentration here and low concentration here. And here we can see we've got low concentration here, high concentration here. Now we know that diffusion is the movement from a high concentration to a low concentration, which means that the movement of oxygen molecules must be A, okay, because oxygen's required for aerobic respiration, okay, and so it's going to move into the cell from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Then we've got the movement of carbon dioxide molecules. Now again, we can totally exclude these 2 because that's the movement in. We know that carbon dioxide is produced, so therefore it needs to leave the cell. So if we have a look, we've got high concentration to low and low concentration to high. So therefore we notice that one is high to low. That question is quite a challenging one. Okay, you have to be really sure about all of those steps. So you need to be really, really secure in your knowledge of what respiration is. You also need to be really secure in your knowledge of diffusion. And you also need to be thinking about cells. So there's a lot of levels to that question. So name the process by which these gases move into and out of the cell. Okay, I've said that a couple of times, that word, so it's diffusion, okay? Okay, so these are the three things, as I've said there, I wanted us to make sure that we're secure on. If there's any that you're not quite sure of, flick back through the video and have a look. Test yourself, use the mastery booklets that we use, and just keep refreshing yourself on how these cells are in particular differentiated. Sometimes these come up as quite long answer questions, and having that knowledge is quite an easy few marks to get. Okay, so just knowing that a sperm cell's adapted in a certain way, okay, and how that helps its function, learning those sort of facts can really, really stand you in good stead for answering some more of those tricky questions.